today I'm going to be talking to you today about like what is the hidden impact of websites in terms of the impact they can have on the environment and how we can work together as kind of like techies, digital designers to reduce the impact that they have on the planet. But a bit of background. Oh, technical issues. We do it like that. Bit of background about me. So I'm Matt Wheeler. I'm the director and co-founder of madeby.studio. So we are a sustainable websites and applications agency based in Leeds City Centre, just 10 minutes down the road. And our focus is building high performance, responsible websites. So we make sure that sustainability and accessibility is ingrained at every single step of the process of what we do, because we want to make sure that the products and websites and applications that we deliver have the least impact on the environment, but also we want to make sure that there is that kind of right to access for information. So no matter whether you have a disability or your cognitive ability, you can still access the website, you can still read all the information in the same as someone that doesn't have disabilities or different cognitive abilities. Let's see if this works. Oh, it does. So a bit of background about kind of the three core services that we do. So the first one is websites, so sustainable websites, applications. The second is digital marketing. So if you're an organization or an individual looking to kind of communicate your marketing in a more sustainable way, we have internal specialists that can do that. So there's kind of two terms that are very common right now in the sustainability space, which is green hushing, which is the first, where you are scared to kind of share your green credentials and your sustainability credentials when you really should do, because if you're doing something, it's more than most. And then there is also greenwashing, where individuals might just be kind of faking their green credentials or sustainability credentials or not conveying it in the correct manner. So we help organizations get that right. And the final one is digital consultancy. So we can kind of work with organizations to look at their digital infrastructure to understand what is the current sustainable impact they're having, how we can reduce it and work with them to make sure that they're working in a more sustainable way. So we've worked with like a series of organizations across like the past 5 years that we've existed, but within the past like year and a half, we've become a bit more purpose driven. So these massive organizations like JD Sports and Kicks and stuff, we don't really work with anymore. We like to work with organizations that focus on environmental and social good, because it aligns with our personal values and the personal values of our team. Ooh. There we go. So to get into kind of the main part of this talk, we're going to kind of just do a quick overview of what the hidden impact of websites is currently. So if we start off with the aviation industry accounts for 2.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So I just want you to kind of keep that fact in your minds. Then if you consider that the internet use accounts for 3.7% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So these stats were taken in 2020. By 2025, it's actually expected that this 3.7% is going to double. But again, this has been recently updated with the introduction of large language models and artificial intelligence, that it's going to be more than double and exponentially increase because of the amount of data that we're storing and processing. So we put that in comparison to kind of something a bit more tangible. If the internet was a country, it would be the 4th largest polluter in the world. So that kind of puts on a scale in terms of what impact it's currently having and why we should all be focusing on building a bit more sustainably with like the websites and applications that we're delivering. I don't know that, but yeah. And then one thing, there we go. One thing to note is that a common thing I always hear is that green hosting solves all problems, and that's not necessarily true. And the reason why is because actually there's a meme on this one, there we go. And the reason why is, I'm just going to do it like that. It only solves part of the problem, because when we kind of, for example, introduce domestic recycling, did it solve the whole problem with the amount of wastage that we're kind of creating and the overconsumption? No. And it's the same case with data centers. Like if we keep producing really kind of heavy data related websites, applications, and just sticking it on data centers without optimizing it, we have an overconsumption problem. We're just consuming more and more data centers. And what that encourages is that these data centers will kind of just start building more physical spaces to store that data. Even though they are running on renewable energy, which is the right thing to do, they still have to manufacture kind of the metals, the plastics, and the parts to kind of keep growing them. So, for example, Microsoft is just invested in these to build out this huge data center to kind of support their artificial intelligence. And it's like a £100 million project. But the reason they have to do that is to store that data. But if we work together to kind of reduce the amount of data that's being produced, we won't have to keep expanding these data centers. So it's time for the web to become more sustainable. So the next bit is just talking about kind of 10 key principles of how to design and develop in a more sustainable way. So they're very kind of like surface overview. They're not going into too much technicals, but I've got a few resources at the end of this talk as well, where you can kind of start going into the different depths of research if you wanted to find out a bit more of certain areas in more detail. So the first one is the sustainable UI and UX design. So we're going to cover like 5 particular points on this. So the first one is incorporate JEDI design practices. So has anyone actually heard of JEDI design practices? Show of hands. 1. Yeah. So essentially, it means justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. So you are building websites and applications with awareness for all the users, then you tend to build in a more sustainable manner. So as a first world country, we are privileged with kind of mobile data pretty much everywhere we go. We've got high, really fast Wi-Fi speeds. Not everyone in the world has that kind of same privilege. So if you look at kind of third world countries or like areas like sub-Saharan Africa, they have very kind of slow networks. They might only be working off mobile devices like 10 years behind what we're working off. So you've got to consider every single user. And when you focus on these kind of lower end devices and networks, you've got to really focus on optimizing what you're delivering. So when you build up from there, you're going to have a more sustainable solution. And then in terms of accessibility as well, if you are really focusing on making what you're delivering accessible to everyone so everyone has that same equal access to information, it's essentially the right thing to do. And again, by incorporating accessibility practices into what you're building, you're actually putting sustainable practices in there as well. The second one is plan your journey. So there is this kind of common problem when we're working with agents, clients and stuff, is that they always want to kind of put loads and loads of information in, which is the wrong thing. In most cases, taking the minimalist approach and really focusing on white space, reducing down the content and focusing on the exact message you want to convey is actually the right thing to do. And not only does this make it more sustainable when you are designing kind of the user interface for your website and application, but it removes the amount of distractions for the user. And there's this kind of term called deceptive design patterns, where if you are intentionally disturbing the user's journey, so let's say you want to get from A to B and you put this massive pop-up in their face, it's going to cause them frustration. It's also kind of wasting data resource because no one really wants that popping up. And also, it's actually more likely that they're going to leave that website as well. So a lot of these sustainable practices actually tie into having a really positive effect on the business value as well. And then again, I've got a kind of repetition of accessibility because again, I'm just going to keep repeating accessibility is the right thing to do all the way through because it should be ingrained into every single website and application that people are building. The third one is keep it lightweight. So essentially less is more. If you can reduce the amount of kind of rich media, such as like images, videos, and stuff that's not really conveying any information, it's going to be more sustainable. Not only that, again, it really helps encourage that user journey. So when you don't have those distractions all the way through and people can kind of really follow along the content, you're building this really strong narrative, people are actually more inclined to kind of stay on the website, they're going to go through pages more often, and you're going to get them to that call to action or the lead generation form you want to get them to. So again, not only is it sustainable, but it's actually adding positive value to your business, and hopefully you'll get more leads in, you can make more sales as a business. Next one is the reduce, optimize, and remove heavy assets. So in terms of heavy assets, what I mean by this is really like large animations, videos, and potentially some images or animations there. Because essentially, we've been running website audits recently across a series of websites. And the biggest asset we always find is videos. So to put it in kind of perspective, we say that a website should be no more than like 1 megabyte. In some cases, a video can actually be about 20 megabytes. And that's essentially 20 times the actual whole website load speed. So if you are trying to deliver a video of that scale straight away, let's say it's like a hero section of a website, you are wasting so much data, so much energy. You're slowing down the website massively. You're going to reduce that performance. And it's actually going to have a negative effect on the overall user experience. They're not going to get from A to B because you are slowing down that loading time. So that's just one thing to consider. It's also the case for images as well. So when you are designing your web pages or applications, you don't want to be just kind of shoving images absolutely everywhere because you think it looks nice. They need to be used very mindfully to make sure that the images that you are using are complementing the written content. Because the key focus of your website is that you want to kind of build a narrative and you want to convey a certain message to your audience. And if you are just kind of throwing images in everywhere as like a decorative stance, you're not providing value, slowing down the website, and actually you might be throwing that user off their narrative. Again, you're going to be damaging the business case for your website, and also it's less sustainable doing it like that. And then one of the most important ones is using a concise design system. So if you don't know what a design system is, it's essentially kind of a set of principles and templates that you can use throughout your whole website to make sure that it stays concise to your particular brand. So this design system could contain like different typographic principles. It could contain certain colors that you're going to use. It's going to contain different modules. And the reason why it's more sustainable to use a design system, because in that design phase, let's say you've got like an accordion block which opens and closes bits of content. If your designer is designing that same block in 5 different variations because it's not coming from a particular system, you are repeating that same task 5 times. When it comes into development, that engineer or software developer or website developer is going to have to code that thing 5 times in 5 different variations. And then when that comes to kind of launching the website, if someone is navigating through the different web pages, you're going to have to import 5 different variations of the exact same thing over and over again. So you're actually just wasting the amount of data there. You're making it slower. It's going to harm the performance. And also, if we consider the scalability of your website as well, if you have a design system underneath it and making sure you follow it really rigidly, you can make that website really scalable. So let's say you wanted a new component block, you can basically just start drag and drop building your websites together, and it can affect the longevity of your website as well. So quite often companies tend to replace their website every 3 years, but you can extend it to like every 3 to 6 years if you've got a really good design system that's scalable behind the scenes. So that's the first bit on the UI UX kind of sustainability principles. So the next bit is going to be going over the kind of software engineering website side. So it's a bit more technical, but I've tried to keep it understandable to people that haven't come from like a development background as well. So the first one is actually use green web hosting. Even though it doesn't solve the whole problem with the current impact of websites, it is the right thing to do. And the way you can kind of understand whether your hosting is sustainable is there's a website called the Green Web Foundation. And on the homepage, you can just drop in your website address and it'll tell you if your hosting is green or not. And the way they check this is every data center will have their own kind of ESG reports. So they kind of report in what they're doing in environmental and social good. There is also this figure called a PUE number as well. So the higher the PUE, which means power usage effectiveness, the more efficient that data center uses its energy. So it usually ranges from kind of 0.5, which is really bad, to 2. So it's quite a simple scale, but if your data center has got a PUE of 2, you know that it's actually using energy really efficiently, and they're focusing on making sure that they're not wasting energy. There is also kind of other areas to look into. So, for example, some data centers are built with intention of supporting the communities around them. So when you build a data center, they produce a shed load of heat, like excess heat, and there's nowhere to pipe it. What you can sometimes do, let's say you've got a community swimming pool that's like owned by a council, you can redirect the excess heat from a data center into heating swimming pools. So that community swimming pool doesn't have to pay for it to be heated, because essentially whatever's wasted from the data center gets pumped into heating the pool, which is really cool. So the bigger the data center as well, they can actually support community efforts around them. So that's also an area to look into. And then in terms of kind of actually coding websites and applications, a lot of it comes into repeating and reusing different bits of content. So this ties very closely into the design system as well. If you have a really good design system behind your website design, when it comes into development and you have a software engineer or a web developer looking at it, they'll understand that if they've got like a series of modules to work off, they can just code those particular modules and just import them wherever you want to. So again, if we use this case of an accordion, and your design system has just one accordion which gets imported everywhere, that developer will just have to code that one accordion once, and every single place it's used, they can just write an import and it'll be imported everywhere that it's ever needed. So you only have one code snippet rather than repeated amount of times as that code snippet. It's more efficient to load. And then if you consider the accessibility as well, so if you make that accordion accessible once and you know it works in that kind of module, when you import it everywhere else, you know it's going to be accessible in every other use case. So it reduces that room failure. There's also the idea of code splitting, which is a bit more of the technical side, but essentially you only want to bring in code which is going to be used on that page. So for example, if you have loads and loads of JavaScript in one massive file, but your website only requires 10 lines of code, do you need the other 1,000 lines of code on that page? No. So if you split the code into different files and just import it where it's needed, it takes less time to load that bit of code. It's more sustainable because you're not wasting energy to load it. And also it follows web best practice, which a lot of people don't actually do. And then also in terms of like the scalability element as well, once you've kind of got it all split and named really well and using effective commenting, it makes it ways to manage, and you can extend the longevity of your website to like 5, 6 years or even further if you wanted to. And then next one is the page weight. So page weight stands for the actual size of data to kind of load the website. So for example, with like the video example I used before, if you have a video on there, it's 20 meg, but your whole website's 1 meg, your page weight is going to be 21 megabytes to load, which is massive in terms of websites. But if you really focus on optimizing it down, and what you can do is set yourself a page weight budget and say, well, I want my website to actually be loaded fully within 1 megabyte. You can make sure that everything that you code and all the assets that you use only work up to that particular limit. And that really makes you focus on like the sustainable impact of website. You are reducing the amount of data it takes to load. It's going to be faster. People are going to get onto that page faster because they're going to start navigating through the different pages really well. So it not only has a really good sustainability benefits, but it has massive performance benefits as well. And hopefully when that user gets on your website, they're going to get to like a lead gen form, contact form, get in touch with you. So it's a win-win all around, essentially. Just wanted to dip into the fonts and colors as well. So a general rule of thumb is don't use more than 3 different fonts on a website, and try and keep it to like 2, max 3 different weights per font. What I always see is like when people are coding websites, you can, for example, use like the Google font stuff. People just download all 12 font weights, import that into their website, and your website is loading all 12 font weights. But in most cases, they're actually just using 1. So why do you need all the excess 11 font weights when you're never actually going to use them? So you can be really mindful of like what you're actually putting into your website. Is it needed? Do you ever actually use it? And then in terms of the colors as well, this again ties into the design system. But if you are reducing the amount of colors that you're using on your web pages, you're making it really concise. It not only follows your brand and makes sure that it's consistent with your messaging and whatnot, but you can actually reduce the amount of lines of code it's taken to deliver particular assets. And there is certain colors which are more energy efficient than other colors. So such as black on particular displays doesn't actually use any pixels to display it, so it uses very limited energy. But you have very bright colors such as yellows, it might use a bit more energy, but I won't go into that because that's very in detail stuff. And then another one which is really good is lazy loading images, which is going to get a bit more technical. So you've probably all heard of like PNGs and JPEGs. They're like the standards for images. But what you can do is deliver your images in modern file formats. So you might have heard of WebP, which is a more efficient version of delivering images, stuff like that. But there's a newer one called AV1 image file formats, or AVIF, which is like the latest tech. And that can actually be quite hard to use because not all browsers support it, not all devices support it. And the way we do it is we use a service called IMGIX, which is like a content delivery network, which when we upload the images to it, it will optimize those images for us. And then once someone loads the website, IMGX will kind of read what device they're on, they're going to read what browser they're on, and they're going to deliver the image which is most optimized for that person. So again, that could even reduce the amount of data required to deliver the assets by more than half in some cases. And that is all done for you. It's a very, very, very simple thing to set up, but that has a massive impact because images and videos tend to be like the most impactful in having a negative effect on sustainability. So you can optimize those down. It's just going to have a massive positive effect. And then the final one on this is remove unnecessary code bloat. So again, it ties into just creating wastage. Like if you are just putting loads and loads of code in that's never actually going to be used, it's never loaded, but it's still getting loaded into a web page, you're just wasting energy and data to kind of render that out. So again, it's being really mindful of what is on your website, cutting out stuff that's not needed, and it's just going to be more efficient and more sustainable as a whole. And it's going to have the kind of performance benefits. Website's going to load faster. People are going to kind of do what you need them to do when they're on that website as well. So again, it's like a win-win all around, essentially. And then cache is like a big one. So this has a massive effect. So in terms of caching, the most common one is like a static site cache, which is very common on any like content management system you use. So on WordPress, you can use like WP Rocket, stuff like that. We use a CMS called Statamic, which does this all for us. But for the people that don't know what a cache is or how it works, essentially it is like a file saved of a particular page, and it can be like caching different videos, caching images, caching the actual kind of web page itself. So the ones we set up, we just generate flat HTML files. So rather than the user interacting with the server trying to generate the page on the fly, which can take up to like half a second in some cases, the server will bypass that. If there's already that cache available, the server will just send that flat file back, and that can happen in like 30 milliseconds sometimes. And actually, because you're not requiring server processing time, it's way more efficient, it's more performance driven, and you are going to save loads and loads of energy because the server processing would be the most kind of energy consuming bit, but by just bypassing that completely, you are saving loads of energy, and it's just like the right thing to do as well. And then number 10 is like, is the content really needed? So 90.6% of internet content on Google gets literally no traffic, which is insane, to be fair. So there's people just storing content on their website, which never gets accessed. No one ever touches it. So why is it there? Like, is that blog post of someone you hired 10 years ago for your business actually needed? Like, that person could be running their own competing business now. Like, what's the point of having that person there? And it's quite common, like when we work with companies, are saying like, oh, we want hundreds of blog posts. We want to bring back all our historical articles from 2012. And I'm just like, why? What value is this providing? And if you take into consideration this stat, pretty much like 90% of that, no one's ever going to look at. So you can just delete it. And if we look at it in terms of business case as well, like if you are really focusing on having relevant and new content which Google prioritizes in terms of SEO, you're going to get rewarded for it. So if you don't have any of this like content bloat on your website, Google will see that. Google can index it a lot easier when it's really kind of well written, it's authoritative, and it's just going to have massive benefits all around. Also, just having stale data stored in data centers, it does require physical space. Just because it's like hosting in the cloud doesn't mean it's like in a cloud. It's on a bare metal data center somewhere physical, might be London, anywhere in the world, just using energy just to have it sit there. But if you delete it, then that space isn't needed. It doesn't require any energy to actually kind of hold that data. So you can just, in most cases, wipe it away. So that's kind of like the 10 key principles. I do kind of questions at the end because it is virtual as well, so I don't want to like confuse people that can't hear. But being sustainable doesn't mean sacrificing results. So this kind of common narrative that like if you want to be sustainable, you've got to have a trade-off for results, which is not the case, because in all the cases I've seen in terms of digital, by being more sustainable, it actually has a positive impact on your business. So the business case for being sustainable is it's just going to help you kind of generate more traffic. It's going to help people navigate your website easier and help them get in touch with you easier as well. So I wanted to kind of talk through what is the current average impact of a website in terms of sustainability, just to put it in context. So this comes from the web sustainability model version 3. But if you have a website and it's getting 10,000 page views per month, and this is across a whole year, it would generate, well, if we look at it in terms of like a single page request, it generates 0.235 grams of CO2 estimated per page request. So that is literally just to load it from nothing to, let's say, the homepage of Google. But if you put that into comparison of this kind of like currency in terms of 10,000 page views across a whole year, that would be 3,820 hours used of an LED light bulb, 1,364 kettles boiled for cups of teas, and 167 hours used a mobile phone. I recently did an audit of a big software consultancy that focus on sustainability as like one of their core principles, and they managed to get, I think it was like 20,000 hours of a light bulb, 10,000 kettles boiled, and insane numbers. And the reason why is because they had this massive video. And I said to them, like, if you chop out this whole video, your website is actually pretty sustainable. But they just wanted this kind of video of tail lights kind of flashing in the background. I was like, it's not providing value, just get rid of it. Which kind of highlights how bad kind of rich media and assets can be. So in terms of like the carbon rating scale, which is like a common scale, this would be C, which is pretty much on average. So if we take a case of one that we've kind of built recently, well, Aaron built recently. So this is like for one of our clients where they didn't necessarily want a sustainable website. We said to them, like, if we start building this sustainably, it's going to have some really good impacts on it. You can see here, it's actually still quite a bit of image there. And I'll show you that there's not actually any trade-off when you start building sustainably. So for example, with Vico, just crouch down, like when you go through, you can see it's still quite dynamic. There's still rich media, still assets there. It's all used in a very like mindful way, but it's still kind of providing that value. And what you would usually see for like a website like this, it would most commonly be very kind of unsustainable with the amount of kind of assets and stuff and what's going on with all these animations. But following the different principles that we've got, we can actually build it incredibly fast. So you can see here, just like flicking through pages, it is pretty much instant to get through different pages. So we compare that to the average carbon emissions for VCO. When we ran the audit on it, it comes out at A on the carbon rating scale. We always use green hosting as standard, it's our whole infrastructure. But we compare that to hours used at light bulbs, 1,253, kettles boiled is 519, and then 152 hours of mobile phone usage. So you can see it's more than half of what the average would be, but we've not had any trade-off whatsoever in terms of actually the user experience or the actual look and feel. And it's really consistent with the brand. And the reason we've done that and how we've done it is by having a really good design system in terms of like the actual visual design, using the software development best practices and all the other things that I mentioned previously. One thing to note as well is, again, it applies to the business case. When you're building sustainably, you have massive, massive performance benefits because there's less data to load. You can load that website way faster. So if we did a Google Lighthouse audit this, the actual performance comes out at 97. It's really difficult to get to 100 when it's got a complex website, but I'd say that's pretty good. And then best practices, accessibility, and SEO are all rated 100. And then if we put this into terms of like an actual stat, for this website, they had a 265% increase in website engagement time within the first 3 months of launch. So this is a massive increase from their previous website, which wasn't very sustainable. Their previous website was quite slow. It didn't really convey anything. And just by following all these techniques, we've had a massive increase in terms of the inquiries of getting through as well. So we've done this for other companies where we've like rebuilt different like product flows or quotation flows and seen 50% increases in kind of conversions or product inquiries because users are able to get from like A to B to C much, much faster. There's less drop off. People can load the pages faster. So they are more inclined to get in touch because they're not getting frustrated by like a slow load time, but you also have a nice sustainable website at the same time. One final thing to note on the business case as well is there is, especially for larger organizations, now have to report their ESG and they have to report the carbon they're producing. One thing that Scope 3 emissions, if anyone's aware of Scope 3, misses is how many emissions your website on digital infrastructure kind of produces. Everyone looks down like the physical supply chain, they look down logistics, but no one's ever actually asked the question like, how much emissions does your website create? So this is something we're trying to kind of educate people on to make it so, for example, the large tech firm that I was speaking about recently, their emissions were in like kilograms of CO2. So the amount of emissions their whole website was generating was more than particular bits of their whole physical logistics supply chain. But because no one can actually see where the website is hosted, no one can see where it is, they didn't actually consider it. So when I did an audit for them, they were actually quite panicked because they had to start reporting that. So they've taken that to C-suite level to start fixing it. So that is another thing to consider. And then off the back of that is if you are working with certain suppliers and you can say to them like, look, we have a sustainable website. We've really focused on like the digital infrastructure and the sustainability of it. You're more inclined to kind of get a positive kind of response in pitches because it shows that you really care about sustainability. So if you're working in industries such as like green tech or clean tech, they really value that. So that's just one thing to note. And then ultimately, it's all about reducing wastage at its core. It's kind of similar to physical overconsumption of products. Like we overconsume products and there's so much wastage, we don't know what to do with it. In terms of digital, we are over-consuming data centers. We're just putting data onto data centers, not really considering how much space it uses. And that's encouraging data centers to keep expanding. And it is just creating loads of wastage of physical space on those data centers. So if you really focus about kind of reducing how much data is on the website, how much space it uses, it's going to be more efficient, more sustainable, and you have all those kind of other business cases that I mentioned previously. So just in terms of like how we actually measure this, because I know it's all good and well me saying like you need to be more sustainable. Here's all the principles to do it. But how do you actually start kind of understanding the baseline of where you're at? So if you all have like websites or your organization have a website, if you go to audit.madeby.studio, it's like a custom built tool we've done. And it gives you a full breakdown in terms of like the carbon emissions per byte, per page request, and also can translate it to the different like currencies such as like LED light bulb, kettles boiled, hours mobile phone use. And one interesting point of this, which is a whole section I've kind of cut out the talk because it's a bit boring, but it also takes into account the current intensity of the national grid. So there is like this whole case that if you run particular processes such as like data crunching when renewable energy is at its peak, that is more efficient because you can't store energy that's like produced by renewable energy. It has to be used as it's produced. And that does take this into account as well, which is really interesting. And like kind of to finish this up, because I'm ahead of 3 minutes ahead of time, but there's a few helpful resources that go into kind of either like an overview of like sustainable web practices and applications and a bit more like into like the deeper technicals if you're interested in that. So the first one is the Web Sustainability Guidelines 1.0. So this is still in draft, but is a really, really in-depth resource and it goes into like very minute detail. So if you're very interested in like understanding like the particular optimizations like fonts, colors, images, text, how you load pages, this has advice on absolutely everything. They even have like advice on how you can talk through like stakeholder conversations, because if you are like in a mid-level or a senior level and you're trying to convince your directors or C-suite to make this change, sometimes because they can't actually see the tangible effect of it, they might not care. So it also helps you kind of mold those conversations, like, look, it's more sustainable, but it's going to have all these business cases. In like 5 to 10 years, we're all going to have to start reporting the sustainability impact of our websites anyway. So why don't we do it now? So that's a really good one to start. It's pretty simple to understand as well, just because of how it's written. Second one is sustainable web design. So this has a load of like really useful like different resources and guides of how to design and develop in some areas in a sustainable way. So it's essentially more kind of community driven. So people are trialing and error different things, seeing the impact and then kind of publishing it here. Because sustainable website design and development is quite a new area, there is not really any central resource of how to do it. It's a rapidly developing area. So the more people that submit or kind of start educating themselves on sustainable practices, the faster that kind of sector can develop and then hopefully transition like the web to be a lot more sustainable. And then I mentioned this one earlier, but the Green Web Foundation, they have a really interesting resource in terms of like data centers, like green data centers. So you can put your website into there, understand whether you're running on green hosting, but they also have a vetted list of green energy data centers as well. So you can go into their verified suppliers. If you already know who you're hosting with, it's very likely they have it listed whether it's green or not. And it also links out to all the different ESG practices of the different data centers. So you know, do they actually care or are they kind of greenwashing and stuff like that? So that's really useful to look at. And then if you're really interested in like the very deep technicals of green software development, website development, the Green Software Foundation is a place to look because this is supported by Linux and it's kind of founded by some of the people that run Linux as well. But they have guides and resources of how you can actually engineer applications to be really sustainable. So this is less on the website side, more on like bespoke application. So how to write particular algorithms, what's the energy consumption of different like if statements and stuff like that. If you're also interested in becoming a green software practitioner, they have a course in there, which is free. And essentially you go through that, it's like 3 steps and it goes into like how the energy grid works and how it relates to software and stuff. But that's really useful for kind of knowing the like inner depths of green software engineering. And then final one, which is a bit of a plug to our other event, which is Green Tech Gathering. So Green Tech Gathering is a community of businesses and professionals or individuals that are interested in green technology and being more sustainable in their businesses. We run the events generally every 2 to 3 months at different locations in Leeds. So the next one is next Thursday as part of Leeds Digital Festival. So that's this Thursday. Thank you. Yeah, this Thursday at Parallax HQ, just over elbow rooms above Revs to Cube, if you know where that is. So we've got the director of Parallax talking about how they found the convenience in rising energy prices, which will be very interesting because that's quite a controversial one. And then we've got a guy called Richard Hill, which has built a sustainable, localized green network of devices. So you can essentially, let's say you've got this laptop here, you can rent the spare resource to this network and you get rewarded by renting unused data on your laptop. It's really cool. So if you want to come along to that, you can scan it, and it is this Thursday, not next Thursday. Yeah, so that's my whole talk. If we do questions digitally first, just so I can close it off, is there any that come through? If we just enable that quickly, I don't actually know how to. So I don't know how to do that. So there's no questions online. So sorry about that. Anyway, if we take questions from in the room, we do it that way. And then if anyone digitally has questions, just email me, I guess, and I'll answer them that way, because I don't know how to turn on. Has anyone got any questions in here then? Yeah.
Instead of sort of having no videos on your website, is there any way more sustainably having videos, like using YouTube iframes or even like directing them to YouTube?
Yeah, so if in terms of like videos, it tends to be best to upload the videos directly to your website, because if you are embedding videos such as like YouTube or Vimeo, when someone loads it, it brings in loads and loads of different data and different tracking scripts in, which start following that user around, and that is just wasting energy. So it is more efficient to upload it directly. If you already have it hosted on YouTube, it's probably best to kind of point them to that video anyway, because then you're stopping the replication of data. Because a large part of sustainability as well is like, if you have duplicated data all over these different places, it tends to be inefficient. But yeah, if the video is not too big, you could just upload it directly to your website, and then people can have a choice to watch it. So one thing to note as well is turn autoplay off as well, because if it's autoplaying, it loads this massive video. It's just a waste of energy, and sometimes it's a frustration to people. Yeah. Then you had a question as well. Oh, cool. Okay. Any others?
So obviously, with something like local tech is
Mhm.
more sustainable and typically as that here, you've got everyone to read better. So if we decide to use something like Squarespace or Wix or something like that, would that be more sustainable than say it still work?
It gets a bit tricky because with Wix, for example, sometimes it's quite difficult to understand what is their infrastructure behind them. So you have less kind of like visibility. And in some cases, they don't use kind of component driven like development. So if you are bringing in page builder blocks, even though that block might be replicated, you don't know how Wix is managing it on the back end. So they could have that same code over and over and over again on the servers as well. But what I found is like when we do audits of Squarespace and Wix websites and stuff, the max I've ever seen it get up to is around C, because when I see on the carbon rating scale, because when you're using these like page builder systems, what they tend to do is like inject loads and loads of different bits of code to make it work in like a relatively general way. Whereas if it was custom built, like the software developer can just write the exact code that is required without any of like that bloat around it. So yeah, we always like recommend trying to go custom where you can, but obviously there's like budget restrictions there sometimes because it does cost a bit more. Yeah.
And our designer was so sketchy.
Yeah.
Or on-site, etc. But because they're using a dual-based script, can they save out of WebEx or the new format that we talked about?
Yeah. So with like PNGs, you tend to use PNGs if it's like flat colors and graphics, and then JPEGs for photography. You can export as like WebP and stuff like that, or AVIF, although it can get a bit tricky because if someone is loading an image on a kind of older browser, it's likely that nothing will actually appear. So with IMJX, for example, what it does, it spits out a load of code where if your browser supports AVIF, it will deliver that. If it doesn't, then it drops to WebP. Then if it doesn't, it'll drop to like PNG or JPEG. So it does that whole decision process for you. So it's a bit less error prone. So I'd always recommend trying to use like a CDN to make it a bit more kind of, to make sure it's delivering the most optimized asset where it can. Does that answer it? Yeah.
And then also, is there any resources for apps? Right, this is obviously like
yeah.
website stuff, but I guess it's still, you know, data apps.
Yeah, so the Green Software Foundation is the place to go for that because they have, especially like the Green Practitioner course, they have all the theories and recommendations of how you don't waste energy and data when you're building applications. So for example, if you have an application that is talking to like a third-party service to get like the most recent data, in some cases, like an application developer might build it so every minute it requests that bit of information, but there might only actually be a change like twice a day. So do you need to make that request constantly? So it teaches you how to like correctly build the infrastructure around like fetching data, managing data, and building stuff in the most efficient way. Another example is like if you are building something that's supposed to like produce like a rough estimate guide or something like that, it's like 2 decimal points. Does your bit of code need to deliver the exact figure to like 60 decimal points? Because that will actually use more energy to get the exact figure, where you could write it in a different way and get a rough estimate, and it'll actually be more energy efficient because it's not getting the exact figure. So that tends to work in like large algorithmic like processes and stuff like that. But yeah, Green Software Foundation has everything in that aspect. Everything else? Cool. Anyone else got any questions? No. Sorry to people digitally because I don't know how to turn on the chat, which is quite ironic considering I do digital stuff. But thank you for thanks for everyone attending today. For people in the room, there's still some sandwiches and coffees and stuff, and feel free just to network and all that stuff. But yeah, thank you for coming along.